Now in this video, what I want to do is take these general ideas about how liberals and conservatives view the proper role of government, the proper order of society, and the role of tradition, their ideologies, and examine the policy implications. In other words, what does this mean in terms of the policies that they support? The underlying subtext of all this is that while liberals and conservatives support different policies, it doesn't mean that one is evil and one isn't, that one hates the poor and one doesn't. It's nothing like that at all. It's just a different understanding and belief about the proper role of government, the proper order of society, and the role of tradition. So, with that in mind, let's start by examining economic policy. Generally speaking, I mean, when I'm referring to economic policy, I'm talking about the role that the government plays in distributing wealth. And in this particular example, I'm going to focus specifically on what are called redistributive policies. Now, redistributive policy is any policy that in which wealth is taken from one group and given to another group. Now, the typical means by which this happens is through taxes, right? Generally speaking, the people from whom money is taken are the wealthy. They, in theory at least, pay higher taxes. And actually, that's not theory. That's actually the way it works. Now, we always hear about these high-profile cases of things like Amazon not paying any taxes. God damn it. Now in this video, I want to expand on what we talked about in the last video. But instead, what I want to do is take the broad idea of ideology and how liberals and conservatives differ in their understanding of ideology and narrow it down to what does it mean in terms of policy? What are the policy implications of these different views on the proper role of government, the proper order of society, and the role of tradition? The subtext for what I'm going to be talking about is that it's not hard to understand why there are disagreements between liberals and conservatives, and it doesn't have to be, those differences don't have to be cast in terms of one being evil and one being good, that it's simply a difference in ideology. That's all. So in this case, let's start off talking about economic policy. Now, when I'm talking about economic policy, generally what I'm talking about is the role that the government plays in distributing wealth among its citizens. Remember, we talked about politics being the struggle over the allocation of benefits and privileges, and that in a democracy, the government plays some role in the allocation of benefits and privileges. Economic policy is one of the ways that the government does that. In particular, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to focus on redistributive policies. Now, redistributive policies are policies that take wealth from one group and give it to another group. Okay, generally speaking, in our system, money is taken from people who make a lot of money and given to people who make less money. Now, there are certainly exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, taxes are paid by people who make a lot of money. I know I'm one of the people who pays a lot in taxes, right? And I'm okay with that because that's the way it's supposed to work. So let's set that aside. Can you think of some examples of redistributive policies? Policies that where wealth is taken from one group and given to another. Just say it out loud, again, unless you're sitting at a Starbucks or something like that and people are going to be wondering why you're shouting out words. Oftentimes in class, students will talk about welfare, right, or food stamps. And these are all perfect examples of redistributive policies. These are policies where taxes are collected. Taxes are primarily collected from people who make more money, right, relative to the population, and then they're redistributed to people who make less money. Here's another example of a redistributive policy that students don't often shout out. Community colleges. Yeah, community colleges, although you pay tuition, right, your tuition doesn't cover the costs of the expenses of running College of the Canyons. A lot of the money that College of the Canyons comes from the government. And when we talk about money coming from the government, that means money coming from citizens, from taxpayers, right? So community colleges are an example of a redistributive policy as well. Public schools are an example of redistributive policies. But in any case, let's think about this. Thinking in terms of ideology, are liberals, do you think, going to be more likely to favor or oppose redistributive policies? Now think about what we learned in terms of what liberals think about the proper role of government to be active, the proper order of society to be egalitarian, right? Hopefully you said that liberals are going to be more likely to favor redistributive policies. What about conservatives? Are they going to generally be more likely to favor or oppose redistributive policies? Well, if you think about what conservatives say about the proper role of government, the proper order of society, right, they're going to be more likely to oppose redistributive policies, or at least have them be lower. In other words, not quite so much redistributed. And we can explain this difference by thinking in terms of ideology. Once again, for liberals, the proper role of government is to be active. So if a liberal who's in the government is looking out and they're seeing that there are impoverished people, or there are people who don't have enough food to eat, or don't have enough health care, their argument is going to be, well, since what we favor is an egalitarian society, the government should be taking an active role in trying to address that. And so to do that, they can tax wealthier people and distribute that money to people who don't have as much, in order to sort of make things more balanced. They don't have to be perfectly balanced, but balanced. What about conservatives? Conservatives want a more limited government. And so obviously we don't want people starving in the streets, but at the same time, we don't want to reward people who are not applying themselves, who aren't working hard, who aren't trying to improve themselves. And so where there is a role for conservatives in terms of redistributive policy, it should be a more limited role. And it should be kept in mind that the goal of the proper order of society is not this egalitarian ideal. As I said in the previous video, talent, initiative, creativity are not equally distributed among the population. And so rewards aren't going to be equally distributed either. And that's okay. It's not the job of the government to create this egalitarian ideal. Now, whether you're a conservative, whether you're a liberal, or whether you fall somewhere in the middle, the idea here is that we don't have to demonize people who have a different idea about the proper role of government and the proper order of society to understand why they differ. We don't have to cast like negative, impugn their character or call into question their morality. They just have a different ideology. That's all. So in the next video, I want to talk about, instead of economic policy, as we've done in this video, I want to talk about social policy.